Maria stood by the restaurant window, looking at the evening city, trying to calm the trembling in her hands. Behind her, the banquet was noisy, her own birthday celebration. 35 years old. The tables were laden with elaborate dishes. Waiters moved between the guests. Her husband Greg's relatives laughed loudly and clinked glasses. Only the guest of honor herself felt like a stranger here. "Maria, come join us," called her sister-in-law Kristen, waving her hand with massive diamond rings. Maria turned around and headed to the table where Greg's entire family sat. Her mother-in-law Victoria Morrison presided at the head of the table like a queen on a throne. Her designer dress probably cost 3 of Maria's monthly nursing salaries. Nearby sat Kristen with her husband, her father-in-law Robert Morrison, Greg's cousins with their wives. "Well, daughter-in-law, are you satisfied with the celebration?" Victoria looked Maria over with an appraising glance. "Greg tried so hard for you. Although, of course, you're used to more modest affairs." Maria clenched her teeth. 7 years of marriage, and her mother-in-law never missed a single opportunity to remind her of her humble origins. Maria grew up in an ordinary family in a small Midwest town. Her mother worked as a diner cook. Her father was a bus driver. They died in a car accident when Maria was 23. She was left completely alone, rented a studio apartment, worked at the hospital, and then met Greg. He ended up in their emergency room with a broken arm after a skiing accident in Aspen. Maria was on duty that night. Greg joked despite the pain, asked her about work, about life. A week later he came again, just because, with flowers. Then there were coffee dates, walks in the park, confessions. Maria fell in love truly with all her heart. Greg seemed so sincere, kind, not like his relatives. When he brought her to his parents' house, a massive estate in an exclusive gated community, Maria understood she had entered another world. A world where she was a stranger. Victoria Morrison met her coldly, looked her over from head to toe, and said icily, "Gregory, darling, are you sure? Look at her." Then Greg defended her, told his mother he loved Maria and would marry her no matter what she said. The wedding was modest. Victoria demonstratively held a country club reception for business partners that same day and didn't show up for the ceremony. But Robert Morrison, her father-in-law, came. He was the only one who shook Maria's hand and said, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." But 6 months later, a massive stroke struck him down. Now he sat in a wheelchair, barely spoke, and Victoria ruled the family single-handedly. "Sit down already," her mother-in-law frowned, standing there like a statue. Maria sat down next to Greg. He squeezed her hand under the table, his way of showing support. But Maria knew he wouldn't openly conflict with his mother. The family business, Morrison Construction and Development, formerly belonged to Victoria after her husband's illness. Greg worked there as VP of Operations, and his mother skillfully manipulated this. "Let's make a toast," proclaimed Cousin Jason, standing with a champagne glass. "To our Maria, who's been with us for 7 years. Good job putting up with our Greg." Everyone laughed. Maria smiled stiffly. Jason was a good-natured oaf, but even his toasts reeked of condescension. "Putting up with," echoed Victoria. "That's for sure. What won't one do for a comfortable lifestyle?" Maria felt something clench inside. She opened her mouth to object, but Greg squeezed her hand again, a warning. "Don't engage." "Not now, Mom, please," he quietly asked. "What, please?" Victoria sipped her wine. "I'm telling the truth. Tell me, Maria, what have you brought to this family? Anything at all? No trust fund, no connections, not even a college degree. You work at the hospital making minimum wage, but you live in our estate, drive our Mercedes, wear the designer clothes we buy you." Maria stood up. Her legs were buckling, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Excuse me, I need to use the restroom." She quickly walked through the hall, feeling the guests' eyes on her. In the restroom, She leaned on the marble sink and looked at her reflection. A pale face, eyes glistening with tears. The dress she had so carefully chosen at Macy's seemed cheap compared to the Chanel and Dior outfits of Greg's sisters-in-law and aunts. Why did she endure it? Why didn't she leave? Because she loved Greg. Because she hoped that one day he would find the strength to stand up to his mother. Because she had no one else, no family, no place of her own. They rented an apartment the first year. Then Victoria generously allowed them to live on the estate in the guest house, but still under her control. Maria washed her face with cold water, fixed her hair, and returned to the hall. The guests had already settled down. Congratulations had begun. Colleagues from the hospital, her few friends, they gave modest gifts and felt embarrassed among this luxury. Greg's relatives gave expensive things, but always with poisonous comments. Here's Chanel No. 5, though you probably don't wear such things. A cashmere wrap from Neiman Marcus. Not for your hospital work, of course, but maybe for special occasions. Maria thanked them, smiled, feeling like a charity case being thrown scraps. And then came the moment she feared most. Victoria rose, tapped a knife against her crystal glass, demanding attention. Dear guests, I want to say a few words about our birthday girl. She swept her gaze around the hall, and Maria saw cold fire in her eyes. 7 years ago, Maria entered our family. I'll be honest, it was unexpected. Robert and I raised Gregory in certain traditions, instilled in him the understanding that marriage is not only about feelings, but also about uniting families with shared values and resources. The hall fell silent. Maria went cold. Greg tried to stand up, but his mother stopped him with an imperious gesture. But our son chose his own way. He chose a girl with no background, no pedigree. We accepted this because we love Gregory. We hoped Maria would prove she was worthy of our family. Victoria paused, but in 7 years she has proven nothing. She lives off us, uses our resources, and gives nothing in return. She couldn't even give us grandchildren. The last words sounded like a slap. Maria gasped. She and Greg indeed had no children. The fertility specialist spoke of issues on both sides, but Victoria always blamed Maria specifically. Mom, that's enough. Greg finally stood up. Shut your mouth. You have no say here. Victoria turned to Maria, and her face twisted with malice. Pathetic gold digger. You think we don't see how you look compared to our women? Like a Walmart shopper among Saks Fifth Avenue. You embarrass our family with your presence. The hall froze in deathly silence. Even the waiters stood still. Sister-in-law Kristen covered her mouth with her hand, feigning shock. But amused sparkles danced in her eyes. She was enjoying the spectacle. Jason stared at his plate. Father-in-law Robert jerked his hand, trying to say something, but only a wheeze came from his throat. Greg grabbed his mother's arm. You're crossing all boundaries. I'm telling the truth. You're afraid to speak. Victoria cut him off. This woman is using you, clinging to you, because otherwise she'll have to return to her trailer park life. Maria slowly stood up. Her ears were ringing. Her vision was swimming, but she forced herself not to cry. Not here, not now, not in front of everyone. She approached the table where her small clutch lay, opened it, and took out an envelope. The envelope had been with her for a week. Old, yellowed, sealed with red wax. She received it from an attorney along with a short letter. Open when you need to defend your dignity. At the time, Maria didn't understand those words, but now she did. She turned to Victoria and slowly, with a calm smile, held out the envelope. Victoria, this is for you. Her mother-in-law stared at the envelope in bewilderment. What is this? Open it and find out. Victoria snatched the envelope, broke the seal, and pulled out several legal documents. She began to read, and with each line, her face paled, her lips trembled, her eyes widened in horror. This can't be true. It's true, Maria said calmly. Absolute truth? notarized and legally impeccable. Greg grabbed the documents from his mother and began reading. His face also turned white. "Maria, did you know? I found out a week ago." Maria looked around at everyone present. "I wanted to tell you quietly in private, but apparently fate decided otherwise." Kristen couldn't stand it. "What does it say?" Maria took the documents from Greg's hands and began reading aloud, clearly and loudly. "I, Peter R. Morrison, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath all property belonging to me, including the controlling interest in Morrison Sterling Construction Group, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and other assets." She paused, looking straight into Victoria's eyes. "To my granddaughter Maria and Morrison, née Stevens, known in the family as Maria." The hall exploded. Someone gasped. Someone started shouting. Victoria grabbed the edge of the table, swaying. "This is a forgery," she screamed. "Impossible. Peter Morrison had no granddaughter." "He did," a quiet, strained voice said from the corner. Everyone turned around. Robert Morrison sat in his wheelchair, but his eyes burned with clear understanding. He raised his hand with difficulty, pointing at Maria. "Granddaughter." Maria approached him, knelt down, took his hand. "Hello, Grandpa." And then she began to tell the story she had learned from the attorney's letter a week ago. Peter R. Morrison was the older brother of Robert Morrison, Greg's father. The two brothers once founded Morrison Construction together in the 1970s, but then had a falling out. Peter left for the West Coast, built his own development empire, and Robert stayed on the East Coast. The brothers communicated rarely, saw each other once every few years at best. Peter Morrison never married, had no children. At least everyone thought so. But he had a daughter, from a woman he loved but couldn't marry. She was married to an abusive husband, desperately unhappy. But divorce in the conservative 1960s and early 70s carried enormous stigma and financial ruin for women. When the baby girl was born, they decided she would bear the surname of her mother's legal husband to avoid scandal and protect the mother. Peter helped financially through anonymous channels, but from a distance. The girl was named Catherine, Katie. Katie grew up, eventually escaped her mother's situation, and married a kind bus driver named Stevens. Peter didn't approve of this marriage. He built an empire and thought his daughter deserved better. The relationship fractured. Katie proudly refused his help and lived on her diner cook's salary. She had a daughter, Maria. Katie never told her daughter about her wealthy grandfather, believing he had abandoned them when they needed him most. Peter Morrison lived with his regrets, built a development empire worth hundreds of millions, but was lonely. When he turned 70, doctors discovered pancreatic cancer. He realized time was running out and decided to find his daughter, ask for forgiveness, finally be the father he should have been. But it was too late. Katie and her husband died in that car accident on an icy highway. Peter Morrison found Maria, already after the funeral. The young woman was left completely alone, working as a nurse, living in a tiny apartment, struggling with student loans. He watched her from afar, hiring private investigators, not daring to approach. What could he say? That he'd abandoned her mother? Wasn't there when they needed him, and now showed up with money and guilt? He saw how Maria lived modestly, honestly, compassionately helping patients. He saw how she met Greg, how she fell in love, how he brought her to his brother Robert's estate. Peter contacted his brother, told him the truth. Robert was shocked, but overjoyed. Greg had unknowingly married his second cousin. They agreed to gradually tell Maria the truth, bring her into the family properly. But then Robert had the stroke. Peter tried to meet Maria several times, but saw how she was struggling to find her place in the Morrison family, how Victoria treated her with contempt. He decided to act differently. He updated his will, transferred his entire fortune to Maria, his development companies worth over $400 million, real estate in 5 states, investment portfolios, everything. and then quietly died in his home in California 6 months ago. The estate attorney brought Maria the letter and documents a week ago. Maria didn't believe it at first. Then she cried all night for the grandfather she never knew, for the mother who left without reconciling with her father, for the lost years, for what could have been. She wanted to tell Greg right away, but something stopped her. She saw how he wavered between her and his mother, how he was afraid of losing his position, his inheritance, his place. And Maria decided to wait, to see how he would behave if the situation became critical. Now she knew the answer. "My mother, Catherine Morrison Stevens, was Peter Morrison's daughter," Maria said, looking into the faces of the relatives. "He kept this secret due to the circumstances and judgment of that era, but before his death decided to correct his mistakes. He watched me for several years, saw how I lived, how I worked, and made his will. Everything went through probate in California. It's ironclad." "This is impossible to verify," Victoria screamed, recovering. "Some documents. He was old, had cancer, could have been mentally compromised." "The will was executed 3 years ago, long before his diagnosis," Maria answered calmly. "Peter Morrison underwent complete psychiatric evaluation by 3 independent psychiatrists who certified his mental competency. Everything was done according to California state law. I've already met with the estate attorneys and my own legal team. They confirmed it's impossible to challenge successfully." Greg looked at her like a stranger. "You knew for a week and said nothing?" "I wanted to tell you privately, but your mother decided to stage a public humiliation instead." Maria turned to Victoria. "You said I brought nothing to this family, that I'm a gold digger, that I'm clinging to your son for his money and lifestyle." She took another document from her clutch. "This is an independent valuation of the assets I inherited. Peter Morrison's Morrison Sterling Construction Group is worth approximately $420 million, nearly 4 times the value of your Morrison Construction and Development at $110 million, plus real estate holdings in California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and Arizona worth another $180 million. Investment portfolios, commercial properties, everything." Maria laid the document on the table in front of her mother-in-law. "So, who's the gold digger here?" Victoria grabbed the paper with trembling hands. The numbers blurred before her eyes. This was a fortune that dwarfed everything the family had. And it belonged to this girl from nowhere. "Maria, listen." Kristen tried to sound friendly. "We didn't know. If we had known, we would have treated you completely differently." Maria smiled bitterly. "Of course, because for you people, a person is worth exactly what their bank account shows." She looked around at all the assembled relatives. They avoided her eyes. Someone fidgeted nervously. Someone pretended nothing had happened. "For 7 years, I lived with you, tried to become one of you, endured humiliation, snide comments, contempt. I thought if I was good enough, patient enough, gracious enough, I would be accepted." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "But you were never going to accept me, because I wasn't from your country club set, because my mother worked in a diner and my father drove a city bus, because I didn't summer in the Hamptons or winter in Aspen." Robert Morrison groaned in his wheelchair, trying to say something. Maria approached him, bent down. "Grandpa, I don't blame you. You tried to help. I see that now. You were the only one who treated me with kindness." The old man nodded, and a tear rolled down his weathered cheek. Greg approached Maria, took her by the shoulders. "Maria, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. Dad never told me about Uncle Peter having a daughter. If you had known, would anything have changed?" Maria looked into his eyes. "Would you have started defending me from your mother? Or would you have remained silent, squeezed my hand under the table, begged me not to make waves?" He paled, stepped back. "I loved you," Maria continued, her voice breaking. "Loved you so much I was ready to endure anything. But every time your mother humiliated me, and you stayed silent, something inside me died. And today, the last bit died. Don't say that. Greg tried to embrace her, but Maria pulled away. We can fix this. I'll be different, I promise. I'll stand up to her. I've heard that promise 100 times. Maria shook her head. Remember last Thanksgiving when your mother announced to everyone that I didn't know which fork to use? You promised to talk to her. Or last summer when she threw all my clothes out of the closet, saying they were embarrassing to have in her house? You promised to put her in her place. How many promises, Greg? He stood with his head down, and Maria suddenly felt sorry for him. He was weak, not bad, but weak. His whole life under his mother's control, afraid of her anger, afraid of losing his inheritance, his position. Victoria finally recovered herself. She stood up, straightened, and fury blazed in her eyes. You think you've won? You think these papers mean something? I'll challenge this will. I'll prove Peter was mentally incompetent. I'll tie this up in probate court for years. You'll accomplish nothing, Maria interrupted, because everything was done perfectly. But even if you could, you should think about something else. About what? Maria took out another document from her clutch. A contract for your largest project, the Riverside Luxury Development, your $50 million project downtown. Remember? Victoria's face went rigid. What about it? The land it's being built on belongs to Morrison Sterling Properties, now mine. The lease agreement comes up for renewal in 30 days. Silence hung in the air. Greg grabbed his head. Maria, no. I'm not saying I won't renew it, Maria said calmly. I'm just reminding you that now the decision is mine. Just like decisions about the 3 banks that provide your company's lines of credit. Banks that have much larger relationships with my companies. And many of your subcontractors and suppliers, they work primarily with Morrison Sterling subsidiaries that I now control. Victoria sank into her chair. She understood. With one wrong move, Maria could destroy everything. What do you want? She asked hoarsely. Respect, Maria answered simply. Just the respect you didn't give me for 7 years. Fine. Victoria clenched her fists. You'll get your respect. No. Maria shook her head. It's too late now. Respect bought with fear is worthless. You showed your true character, and I've made my decision. She turned to Greg. I'm leaving. Our marriage is over. Maria, wait. Greg grabbed her hand desperately. Give me a chance. I'll be different. We'll move out, get our own place. I'll quit the company. You won't change, Maria said sadly, because the problem isn't your mother. The problem is you. You allowed her to humiliate me because it was easier than standing up to her. You chose comfort over courage every single time. That's not fair. It's completely fair. Maria freed her hand. I'm filing for divorce Monday morning. Don't try to stop me. And don't worry. I won't destroy your family's company. All contracts will be renewed on standard terms. Despite everything, I'm not vindictive like you people. She picked up her clutch, looked around the hall one last time. The guests were silent, not knowing what to say. Colleagues from the hospital looked at her with respect and compassion. Greg's relatives with poorly concealed fear and resentment. Maria approached Greg's father, bent down, kissed his forehead. Goodbye, Grandpa. I'll come visit you. Alone, without them. Robert nodded, squeezed her hand with surprising strength. Maria headed for the exit. At the door, she stopped, turned around. You know what's saddest? Peter Morrison left me a letter. He wrote that he watched me for years and admired how I lived, how I cared for patients at the hospital, how I stayed compassionate and honest despite struggling financially, how I volunteered at the homeless shelter on my days off. He wrote that he was proud to have a granddaughter like me. She looked at Victoria, and I desperately wanted to hear those words from you, from my husband's family. Just, we're proud of you, Maria. But you didn't even consider me human. I was just the help who got above her station. Maria walked out of the restaurant. Outside was a warm September evening. City lights glowed, cars passed by. Ordinary life, continuing despite everything. She took out her phone and called her friend Lisa, a fellow nurse from the hospital. "Lisa, can I crash at your place tonight?" "Yes, everything's fine." "Well, I'll explain when I get there. Thank you so much." Maria got an Uber and left, leaving her old life behind. Ahead was the unknown, frightening, but finally free future. The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of events. Maria hired top attorneys, filed for divorce, began dealing with the massive inheritance. It turned out Peter Morrison's empire was even more impressive than she initially thought. 3 major construction and development companies, several commercial real estate portfolios, luxury residential developments, land holdings throughout the West Coast, all of it requiring management, decisions, board meetings. The executives of the companies her grandfather owned were initially skeptical. A young woman, a nurse with no business degree or experience. They expected she would quickly sell everything or make catastrophic mistakes. But Maria surprised them. She came to meetings prepared, asked penetrating questions, learned rapidly, and most importantly, she remembered what she learned working with patients, how to read people, see through deception, understand who was trustworthy and who wasn't. One senior VP tried to manipulate her into a terrible acquisition deal that would have benefited him personally. Maria calmly brought in forensic accountants, uncovered the scheme, and fired him on the spot. After that, the executives began treating her with genuine respect and healthy caution. Greg called every day, sent texts, begged for meetings. Maria didn't respond. She needed time to sort through her feelings, understand what she truly felt. Love, betrayal, pity, all tangled together. After 2 weeks, he showed up at Lisa's apartment where Maria was temporarily staying. Lisa wanted to slam the door in his face, but Maria stopped her friend. Let him in. Greg looked terrible, unshaven, gaunt, hollow-eyed. He sat down across from Maria in Lisa's small living room, and they were silent for a long time. "I understand now," he finally said. "You were right about everything. I was a coward. I let Mother treat you horribly because I was afraid of losing her approval, my position in the company, my inheritance, afraid of conflict." He rubbed his face with his hands. "I kept thinking things would get better with time, that Mother would eventually accept you, but she never intended to, and I was too weak to admit it." "And what now?" Maria asked quietly. "I moved out, got an apartment in the city. I quit Morrison Construction, sent Mother my resignation yesterday." He looked into her eyes. "I don't need her company, her money, any of it. I need you." Maria sat in silence. Part of her wanted to believe, to forgive, to try again. But another part remembered every humiliation, every time he chose silence over defending her. "Greg, I don't know," she admitted. "There's been so much pain, so much damage. Please, give me one chance to prove I've changed. Just one." "Not now." Maria shook her head firmly. "I need time. Maybe 6 months. A year. Maybe never. I honestly don't know. But right now I need to be alone, figure out who I am without constantly being judged and diminished." Greg nodded slowly, stood up. "I'll wait, however long it takes." He left, and Maria broke down crying on Lisa's shoulder. She knew it was the right decision, but that didn't make it hurt any less. Meanwhile, Victoria wasn't giving up. She hired the most aggressive attorneys in the state to challenge the will, filed multiple lawsuits, trying to prove Peter Morrison was mentally incompetent, that he was unduly influenced, that Maria was a con artist who manipulated a dying old man. Court hearings followed one after another. Victoria produced witnesses, neighbors she paid to testify about Peter's allegedly erratic behavior, distant cousins claiming they'd never heard of any daughter, even tried to suggest the DNA evidence was fabricated. But Maria's legal team was better. They presented ironclad medical evaluations from 3 psychiatric experts confirming Peter's mental competency. Testimony from the estate attorney who'd known Peter for 30 years. Multiple DNA tests from certified labs confirming the biological relationship through Robert Morrison. And crucially, Robert Morrison himself provided written testimony, painstakingly typed one-handed on a tablet by the man who could barely speak. He confirmed everything. Yes, his brother Peter told him about the daughter and granddaughter. Yes, they'd planned to bring Maria into the family. Yes, the will was legitimate. This was the turning point. The probate judge in California dismissed Victoria's challenge with prejudice, calling it frivolous and vexatious. The will stood. All attempts to overturn it failed. But Victoria didn't stop. She launched a different campaign, spreading rumors in their social circles that Maria had seduced a dying old man for his fortune. She tried to convince business partners and banks to blacklist Maria's companies. She attempted to destroy Maria's reputation among the city's elite. Maria could have retaliated in kind. With her resources, she could have crushed Morrison Construction completely. But she remembered what she'd said that night. "I'm not like you people." Instead of revenge, Maria focused on building. She brought in talented managers, modernized operations, implemented sustainable building practices, invested in innovative technologies. Peter Morrison's companies, which had operated profitably but conservatively for decades, began aggressive expansion. Within 3 months, profits increased 35%. Maria didn't forget where she came from. She established the Catherine Stevens Memorial Foundation to help people without family support, orphans aging out of foster care, elderly people with no relatives, young adults who'd lost parents. She donated $5 million to modernize the hospital where she'd worked, funding new equipment, raising wages for nurses and support staff, creating a scholarship program for nursing students from low-income backgrounds. When the hospital CEO thanked her profusely, Maria just smiled. "I remember what it's like to work exhausting shifts for barely enough to pay rent while saving lives. This is the least I can do." Gradually, people began talking about her not as a scandalous gold digger, but as a businesswoman with integrity and vision. Partners Victoria had tried to turn against her sought-out collaborations. Major investors wanted meetings, and Morrison Construction and Development began struggling. Major clients left, credit lines tightened, reliable subcontractors became mysteriously unavailable. Not because Maria was interfering. She truly wasn't. But the market is ruthless, and Victoria's company, built on her husband's legacy and maintained through connections and intimidation rather than innovation, started crumbling without Robert at the helm. 6 months after that catastrophic birthday dinner, Victoria appeared at Maria's executive office in downtown Los Angeles. Maria was genuinely surprised to see her. Victoria had aged dramatically, gray roots showing through her usually perfect blonde hair, exhausted face, trembling hands, expensive clothes that now hung loosely on a frame that had lost too much weight. "I need help," Victoria said without preamble, her voice stripped of its usual imperious tone. "The company is failing. We can't make our loan payments. Projects are stalled. We're facing bankruptcy. And what do you expect me to do?" Maria asked calmly from behind her grandfather's massive oak desk. "You control so much of the market now. You could throw us a project, help restructure our debt, put in a word with the banks." "I could," Maria nodded. "But why would I?" Victoria bit her lip. The words clearly tasted like poison. "Because I'm asking. And because I was wrong. About everything." Maria leaned back in her leather chair, studying the broken woman before her. This proud, cruel woman who'd made her life hell, now begging for mercy. "You humiliated me for 7 years," Maria said evenly. "Called me trailer trash, a gold digger, pathetic. Said I was a leech on your family. Mocked my dead parents, my background, everything about me. And now you want my help." "I know." Victoria's voice cracked. I was vicious, unfair, cruel. I couldn't accept that Gregory chose someone I didn't approve of. I wanted a daughter-in-law from our world, from the country club families, with the right schools, the right connections. Someone who understood our world. Your world, Maria repeated softly. But it turns out this poor girl from nowhere was actually your niece, Peter Morrison's granddaughter, your husband's blood family. I didn't know. Victoria's composure finally broke. Robert never told me. Peter kept it secret. If I'd known. It wouldn't have mattered, Maria said wearily. You would have found some other reason to look down on me. It was never really about my background. It was about control. About me not fitting your narrow definition of acceptable. About threatening your authority in your little kingdom. Yes. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. Yes, you're right. I'm a snob, an elitist, a terrible person who thought money and status were everything. I lived in my bubble and looked down on everyone outside it. There, I've admitted it. Are you satisfied? Maria said nothing. Victoria started crying, ugly, desperate tears, mascara running down her gaunt cheeks. I've lost my son, she sobbed. Gregory won't speak to me. He moved out, quit the company, blocked my calls. Robert looks at me with such disappointment, even though he can barely communicate. Kristen and the others disappeared the moment they smelled blood in the water. Turns out all those relationships were just transactional. I'm alone, completely alone. And the company my husband built, that Peter helped start, is dying. Maria stood, walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out, there were people suffering, people who needed help. She could spend her resources on that, building shelters, funding schools, creating opportunities. Or she could spend her time punishing someone who was already destroyed. I'll help you, she said without turning around. What? Victoria's head snapped up, disbelief in her red-rimmed eyes. I'll structure a deal to save your company. A small project to start, but enough to make your immediate loan payments and stabilize operations. Maria turned around, but with non-negotiable conditions. Anything. You will publicly apologize to everyone you hurt, at a gathering of the same people who were at that birthday dinner. You'll take full responsibility for your behavior. Victoria swallowed hard. Agreed. And you will never interfere in Gregory's life again. If he chooses to have a relationship with you, that's his decision. But no more manipulation, no more using money as control, no more emotional blackmail. Agreed, Victoria whispered. My attorneys will contact you with the terms. It won't be generous, market rates, strict oversight, performance clauses. This is business, not charity. Victoria stood shakily, headed for the door. At the threshold, she paused. Why? She asked, her voice small. Why help me after everything I did? Maria considered the question. Because my grandfather Peter Morrison lived his entire life regretting his mistakes, regretting that he wasn't there for his daughter, that pride and fear kept him from his family until it was too late. He died carrying that burden of regret. She met Victoria's eyes. You still have time. You have a son. You have a husband who needs you. Don't die with those same regrets. Fix what you can while you still can. Victoria nodded, unable to speak, and left. A year passed. Maria never returned to Greg. They met occasionally for coffee, maintained a cordial relationship, but the spark was gone. Too much damage, too many betrayals of trust. The divorce was finalized quietly. Maria didn't ask for any of the Morrison family assets, and Greg didn't contest the prenup he'd insisted on years ago that now seemed grimly ironic. Greg found work at a respected architecture firm, started building his own reputation separate from his family name. He matured, found his own voice, grew stronger. Sometimes Maria thought, this is who he could have been all along, if he hadn't been under his mother's shadow. But you can't rewrite history. Victoria kept her promises. She organized a small gathering and made a genuine, painful apology to Maria and the others she'd hurt. She stopped calling Greg constantly, stopped trying to control his decisions, gave him space to become his own person. Robert Morrison was slowly recovering. Speech therapy was helping, though he still struggled with complex sentences. Maria visited him every week at the estate, and they would sit in his study talking about Peter, about her mother Catherine, about the past and the future. "Forgive me," he managed one afternoon, his voice halting but clear. "Should have protected you." "You were ill, Grandpa," Maria said gently. "It wasn't your fault." "Before the stroke, I knew about Peter's plans. I was weak, like Gregory." "You're not weak now." Maria squeezed his hand. "And neither is Greg anymore. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom to find their strength." And Maria found someone new, not from a wealthy family or business background. A pediatrician named David Chin from the same hospital where she'd worked. He treated underserved children, volunteered at free clinics, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and dreamed of opening a comprehensive health center in low-income neighborhoods. They met at the opening ceremony of the hospital's new wing that Maria had funded, started talking, discovered they had everything important in common, both from working-class backgrounds, both valued people over possessions, both wanted to make a real difference. They took it slow. Coffee dates, long walks, conversations that lasted until dawn. David had no idea about Maria's wealth. She didn't tell him, and he didn't ask. He cared about who she was as a person, not her bank balance. When Maria finally told him the truth, he was surprised but unchanging in his feelings. "You're still the same Maria I fell for," he said, simply taking her hand. "Money doesn't change who you are inside. Though I hope you'll consider funding my community health center dream," he added with a grin. Maria often reflected on that birthday night. The humiliation, the revelation, the moment she handed Victoria that envelope. It was a turning point that changed everything. She could have stayed silent, as she had for 7 years, could have endured another public degradation and pretended it was normal. But she found the courage to stand up for herself, and that made all the difference. Sometimes she visited the cemetery where Peter Morrison was buried in a beautiful plot overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She brought flowers, sat on the bench nearby, and told him about the companies, the foundation, her life. "Thank you, Grandpa," she would whisper. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me, when everyone else just saw a poor girl from nowhere. I promised to honor your faith in me." And she did honor it. With every business decision, every charitable contribution, every day lived with integrity and compassion. She didn't become vengeful, didn't let wealth corrupt her, didn't turn into someone like Victoria had been. She remained herself, Maria, who'd cared for patients with tenderness, who helped even those who'd hurt her, who believed in goodness over revenge. Money, power, influence, all of it came to her. But what mattered most was that she kept her soul intact, kept her humanity alive. And that, she knew, was the most valuable inheritance of all.